It was a quiet night in the Jones household. The curtains had been drawn, the doors and windows locked tight, and the lights all turned off. In the living room, however, light flickered onto the carpet and cast the youngest boy, Ernest's shadow, onto the high pile carpet beneath him. "WBSC will now cease broadcasting," a voice said to Ernest through the speakers. "Our next scheduled broadcast will come to you at 7:30 a.m. for the morning news broadcast. Until then, thank you and good night." The set went blank for a moment, then white and black static filled the screen and empty noise engulfed the room. Ernest didn't move. Instead, he sat staring at the set with wide, transfixed eyes, lost in the dancing lines and dots of the active display before him. His movement went unwavered, until someone crept their hand onto his shoulder. "Ah!" he shouted, spinning around and stumbling back into the television to see his older brother, Eddie, standing above him. "Ha! I gotcha!" Eddie laughed and leaned back. He pointed at his brother. "I got you good." "Why'd you do that, Eddie? Why'd you have to scare me?" Eddie thought for a moment. "'Cause it was funny," he replied. Ernest frowned. "It wasn't funny to me." He sat back down on the floor and continued staring into the television set. Eddie stopped laughing. "Shouldn't you be in bed anyway?" He spoke with a sharp tone. "What do you care?" Ernest asked. "I don't," Eddie replied, wiping spittle from the peach fuzz on his chin. "But Mom told me to make sure you got to bed, remember?" Ernest sighed, but didn't move. Eddie slumped into his father's recliner. "Besides, haven't you heard of—" Eddie cleared his throat. "Static Man?" Ernest turned and saw Eddie's face. Eyes squinted, mouth flat. "What do you mean?" he asked sheepishly. "Who's Static Man?" "Static Man is the man—" Eddie paused and turned his head from left to right. "Thing that comes out of the television at night." Ernest's eyes went wide with fear as Eddie told the story. "He slowly creeps out of the screen, using his arms to pull himself out." Eddie put one arm out, then another as his voice became a whisper. "Then his head pops out, but there isn't any face." Eddie leaned in to hear him better. "Why doesn't he have a face?" he asked. "He doesn't have a face." Eddie leaned back. "Because he's made of static, just like the TV set." He pointed to the screen that was still filled with the white and black specks dancing around on the glass. "Then he grabs you by the feet." Eddie drifted off and leaned in closer to his younger brother, but remained silent. "Then what?" Ernest asked impatiently. "What happens next?" "Well, then he gets you!" Eddie shouted, grabbed his brother's ankles and pulled them, causing Ernest to fall onto his back in terror while Eddie laughed. Eddie fell back into the recliner and tried to catch his breath, while his brother lay on the floor doing the same. "Eddie!" Ernest cried, tears welling up in his eyes as he stood. "You scared me!" Eddie was unfazed by his brother's crying, and he watched through clouded eyes as Ernest ran up the stairs and into his room. It was nearing 2 a.m, and Eddie awoke to the flickering of lights beyond his eyelids. When he opened them, he realized that he had fallen asleep in his father's recliner and had forgotten to turn off the television. He blinked once, then twice, and as his body started to become unfrozen from the grasps of sleep, he found himself unable to move. Panicking, he attempted to look around him, but he couldn't move his head. He realized that the recliner had been moved closer to the television, and that his head, arms, and hands were restrained to the chair with a thick, scratchy rope. To his left, he noticed a vague outline of someone familiar, and after moving his eyes, he saw his brother. "Ernest, thank God!" he shouted as he fought the restraints. "You've got to get me out of here." Ernest moved closer to the chair. "Why?" he asked. He grabbed one of the ropes near Eddie's arm and pulled it tighter. "Are you afraid of Static Man?" "Oh, come on, Ernest, that was just a joke," Eddie cried exasperatedly. "I was just fooling around, honest." Ernest moved to the right of the chair and tightened another rope, but remained silent. "Ah, geez, I didn't mean to scare you that badly," Eddie pleaded. "I'll never make fun of you again, swear." Ernest blinked slowly and rubbed his eyes before turning his gaze to the television. He watched as, faintly at first, a rough outline of a hand formed near the center of the screen. Ernest smiled. Eddie moved his eyes to the glass as a second hand started to force its way out. Each looked exactly like the background they reached out of. Static. The white noise from the speakers grew slightly louder as the head slid out from the fuzziness, and each hand slapped down onto the carpet in front of Eddie. Sparks of electricity flew from the fingertips of the creature and jumped up Eddie's leg as the head fully revealed itself. Eddie looked on in horror at the faceless figure and fought the restraints. "Ernest, you've got to help me, please!" A hand slapped down onto Eddie's left ankle. "Oh, God, Ernest!" Eddie screamed. The second hand fell down upon his right ankle. Slowly, the thing pulled itself back into the television. "Ernest! Ernest, help!" Eddie screamed. The electricity jumped from the hands to his legs and crept up, slowly turning them into static as they were pulled into the screen. Eddie shouted and wailed in agony as the ropes were also consumed by the static and released their hold on him. The figure quickly retreated into the set. Screaming, Eddie grabbed the chair in an attempt to pull himself out. Instead, it fell against the television, toppling it to the floor in an explosion of glass and light as the last of Eddie's head was pulled in. Later that morning, Ernest's parents arrived home to find him hiding in the closet near the foyer, tears streaming down his face and in a cold sweat. "Oh my God," his mother said. She reached down and picked him up. "What happened?" "He broke the TV is what happened," his father said from the living room. "Someone came in and took Eddie," Ernest exclaimed in his mother's arms. Their looks changed. His mother set Ernest on the carpet and ran to the kitchen phone. His father walked away from the TV and sprinted to the second floor to look for Eddie. Through the chaos, Ernest shambled into the study in the back hall, turned on the television, and watched. The end.